All right, kids, we're back to talk about the end of World War II and specifically the Japanese defeat. All right, so we want to focus in on the end of the war in the Pacific. All right, so we know that the defeat of the Axis power, primarily when we look at the war, I mean, there were many contributors to the Allied victory. Specifically, though, with the interest of the USA and all the resources, and the Soviet Union and the British Empire, they really contributed a lot and deserve a lot of the credit for the defeat of the Axis powers during World War II. Um, and I'll give you an example here where you see that the American, once it started to really mobilize and produce, not just mobilize, but to actually be in wartime production mode, so to speak, it turned a lot of resources that the Germans nor the Japanese could match. You see here a figure of 70,000 tanks and 120,000 aircraft carriers in just 1 year. All right, so that's pretty significant because, I mean, when we look at it, we have to think back to the home front where that was the focus for the war. All right, it was mobilizing the women and those that stayed at home to really support this wartime industry, and a lot of industries started to manufacture goods that were used in the war. All right, so the defeat of the Japanese, we know it was really a United States battle, albeit there were British and other Allied troops that helped in the Pacific. This was primarily the U.S. is known for its defeat of Japan. Of course, with the American air power and the Navy, um, that's sort of what played this vital role. All right, and the Air Force is really known for its uh, ability to supply the Allies in this whole um, Pacific campaign. All right, because you got to think that, especially in Southeast Asia, it's very a lot of islands, so it's a lot of water. A lot of the Navy was really crucial in this victory. Okay, now the Japanese control. Uh, we know that by 1942, Japan had really they had a strong dominance in the Pacific. So we have Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Burma, the East Indies, Guam, and Wake Island. And we know that the Battle of Midway, we talked about that, that was that crucial turning point which turned the tide of the war. So now the U.S. wasn't necessarily on the defensive. Now we're starting to move on the offensive to recapture those islands from Japan. All right. Um, and as a result, it was hard for Japan to recover, and Americans will, the Air Force and Navy will keep its lead in manufacturing and having the wartime capabilities of the aircraft carriers and so forth and so on, and the dive bombers and the airplanes. All right. So the Battle of Midway, we know that they started this island hopping campaign, and it was really to capture certain key islands. Um, and the whole goal at first was to get into bombing range of the mainland of Japan. All right, and of course it turned to sort of wanting to invade Japan. But as this whole war in the Pacific proceeds, it becomes apparent that A, the Japanese aren't going to give up, but B, um, it was a lot of bloodshed and a lot of lives, all right, that were at stake. Um, but this whole island hopping campaign, the war in the Pacific, primarily we want to look at General Douglas MacArthur, who was commander of the Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, and Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, who was commander in chief of the Pacific Fleet, so the fleet. All right. So the first stage began under the Nimitz and Marine Land Holdings on Guadalcanal and nearby islands in the Solomons. And we'll look at a couple of battles here. I know there are a lot of battles that we've talked about, within the war itself. There are key battles that you have to know, but then there are some that, just give you a little bit more insight as to what was going on. So this is the Battle of Lake Gulf, and this is one of those crowning achievements for the United States in the Pacific theater of the war. Um, this battle is what's most important about this battle is that it crippled the Japanese combined fleet, and it allowed the U.S. to eventually go in and invade the Philippines to recover that island and reinforce like the the presence and dominance in the Pacific. All right, so this was that decisive air battle. In Lake Gulf, you know, Japan lost a lot of aircraft carriers and battleships and lots of soldiers, and the Allied losses were a lot fewer. All right. Um, this marked the last time that the Imperial Japanese Navy would be able to conduct a large scale like operation. So that's why this is really significant. All right. Now, so it secured the beachhead on the lake and opened the door for the liberation of the Philippines. All right. And Japanese were cut off the Japanese, from their conquered territories in Southeast Asia. All right, which greatly reduced the flow of supplies. And so, without those supplies, it was hard for the Japanese to sort of continue on with any kind of large scale invasion. So everything was sort of um, taken down to a lesser extent and really crippled them. All right, so that's why this battle is significant. Now, one of the bloodiest battles of in the Pacific was the Battle of Okinawa. All right. Now, this was one of the last and biggest of the Pacific Island battles of World War II. Uh, it involved lots of troops. We see 287,000 troops of the U.S. against 130 soldiers of the Japanese army. Of course, there were very important air bases that were vital to the invasion of Japan. So remember, that was the goal here when we went on the offensive. All right. The Japanese forces, of course, now, it was sort of like a do or die situation. And of course, the Japanese, they refused to surrender. And so they're going to use all of their resources to sort of stage these mounted mass air attacks and these kamikaze tactics, so to speak. And that's just this one way suicide where you would take the dive bomber or a plane itself and um, crash it into a vessel. So you're sort of like a suicide attempt. So those kamikaze missions were very prevalent throughout this time. All right, the Japanese sent the biggest battleship that they had, the last one, the Yamato, on the similar mission, and there were bloodsheds, not only civilian bloodsheds and military bloodsheds, also both land and sea. All right. So in this battle, this is just an example of how uh, bloody it was. Both generals on both sides died in the course of this battle. All right. U.S. sort of there were over 7,000 that were killed. Just some statistics: 31,000 that were wounded, and of course the Navy suffered huge losses, and the Japanese um, 4 destroyers with losses of more than 10,000 soldiers. All right. Now, uh, we know that now we see the loss of lives. They sort of added up a lot. There was a lot of outcry in America and other places as to saving American lives. All right, the Japanese would not surrender, so there was sort of some controversy over what to do next. All right, and there's a lot of historical debate about what could have been done with the whole atomic bomb decision and what wasn't done. We won't necessarily get into that per se, as much as we will say that the atomic bomb was dropped. And there's Robert Oppenheimer, who was the lead scientist over the Manhattan Project and sort of led the team that created this atomic bomb. Um, Truman does go on to decide to use this atomic bomb, and this was not necessarily, he wasn't in agreement there. I mean, there wasn't mass agreement amongst officials, all right, to use this atomic bomb. Many said no, but he used a rationale as to, we want to save lives and we don't want to invade the Japanese mainland. That's what his rationale was. However, others agree that there were other precautions that were in place that could have been presented where he didn't have to drop the atomic bomb. Of course, we know that it hit home. And a lot of historians say that this was a chance for the U.S. to show its dominance and sort of the tool that it's created. But nevertheless, it was dropped, and there you see the big mushroom cloud that's associated with it. And well, the picture's kind of blurry, but you can see that it's a lot of rubble here and a lot of people. So there were uh, a lot of people that were affected, not only killed but affected later on, generations, because of all of the um, devastation that this caused. All right. Now, one of the things that was issued before the atomic bomb was even dropped was the Potsdam Declaration. And the Potsdam Declaration, or the proclamation that defined the terms of Japanese surrender, it called for Japan to surrender. All right, and there were a group of people, Truman, Churchill, and then the chairman of the National Socialist Party, which was in China. They issued this document that would outline the terms of surrender for Japan. All right, and the last line of this said that if Japan did not surrender, it would face prompt and utter destruction. So this was actually sent before the atomic bomb was dropped. All right, so they were sort of giving Japan this out, so to speak, to say, hey, this unconditional surrender, or you will face prompt and utter destruction. All right, and of course it asked for an unconditional surrender. So of course the Japanese uh, continued to fight. They rejected the demand, so to speak, and this the anti-surrender sentiments and objections from much of the Japanese military, it was kind of widespread. So, of course, there were people in the military that, especially the founder of the kamikaze mission, so to speak, they argued that the Japanese would never be defeated. Um, and we were prepared to offer up all of these lives just to make sure that we're not defeated, or we're going to fight till the end. However, the emperor, goes on. First time a lot of people hears the emperor's voice in Japan on the radio to say that Japan is surrendering on August 15, 1945, and he announced it, and the war was technically over. But we celebrate VJ Day, or Victory in Japan Day, on September 2nd, 1945, when the actual signing of the documents for Japan's surrender, which officially ended World War II. All right, and there you see the actual signing, and there we have it, my friends.